The studio invitation, the bright sun peeked gently through the massive glass windows of Sundar Pichai's office at Google headquarters. The CEO of one of the world's most powerful companies sat quietly at his desk, scanning through a few reports. His calm demeanor was as steady as ever. For most, leading a tech empire could be overwhelming. For Sundar, it was another day filled with opportunity, gratitude, and responsibility. His assistant, Emily, entered quietly, holding a small, sleek envelope. "Mr. Pichai, this came for you by private courier. Very confidential," she said. Sundar looked up with his usual kind smile. "Thank you, Emily." He opened the envelope, and inside was a formal invitation embossed with gold letters. "You are cordially invited to participate in a special feature episode at Global Vision Studios in Los Angeles. The show will feature celebrated leaders who have shaped modern industries. Your presence would be a great honor." At the bottom was the signature of the show's executive producer, a well-known media personality who loved bold ratings and viral moments. Sundar tilted his head slightly. Invitations like this weren't uncommon, but something about this one made him pause. He had heard stories about this particular show. It was notorious for setting traps for guests, hoping to create viral controversy. The host loved drama more than dialogue. Still, Sundar believed in taking opportunities to share positivity and inspire people, no matter the risk. "Should I confirm your appearance, sir?" Emily asked. "Yes." Sundar nodded softly. "We should never miss a chance to reach people with a good message." The following week flew by. The preparation was thorough. As always, Sundar studied the likely questions, talked with his team about the potential directions of the interview, and reminded himself of one key rule he always followed: stay calm, stay kind. The studio, Los Angeles. When Sundar arrived at Global Vision Studios, he was greeted by a wave of flashing cameras and bustling staff. The place was full of energy, bright lights, busy assistants, and studio personnel rushing in every direction. A tall man in a shiny suit approached him. "Mr. Pichai, welcome, welcome," he said loudly. "I'm Stephen Carr, executive producer. We're thrilled to have you." Sundar shook his hand politely. "Thank you for the invitation." Stephen leaned in slightly, his voice lower. "You know how our show works, right? A bit of tough love, some hard questions. The audience loves it." Sundar smiled gently. "I'm here to have an honest conversation, that's all." Stephen gave a half smirk. "Honest, of course." As Sundar was led to the green room, he passed a few members of the production crew, who whispered as he walked by. He overheard snickers, one mocking his Indian accent, another whispering, "I bet he's just lucky, probably doesn't even code." Sundar heard it all, but his face remained peaceful. Years of experience had taught him that such comments were only reflections of others' insecurities. Inside the green room, Sundar sat quietly reviewing his notes. Soon, his phone buzzed. It was a message from his old friend Eddie Murphy. "Heard you're doing that studio show today. I might drop by. Let me know if you need backup." Sundar chuckled softly. Eddie always had a way of making tense moments lighter. The two had formed an unlikely friendship years ago at a charity event. Eddie admired Sundar's humility. Sundar admired Eddie's resilience and ability to turn pain into laughter. The door creaked open. A young production assistant walked in holding a clipboard. "We're ready for you, Mr. Pichai. Just follow me." As Sundar walked through the hallway toward the stage, he noticed the increasing energy. A live audience had already filled the seats. On the walls were posters teasing tonight's show. Big tech giants, the real truth behind their success. Sundar breathed calmly. The host, Brandon Clark, was standing center stage, grinning widely as he hyped the audience. Brandon was known for his controversial style, confrontational, sarcastic, often pushing his guests into uncomfortable territory. He loved to corner people, make them squirm, and then let the audience judge. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," Brandon announced with his dramatic voice, "the man who holds the digital keys to billions of people's lives, the CEO of Google, Mr. Sundar Pichai." A polite applause filled the room, mixed with a few sarcastic claps from certain audience members, who were clearly fans of Brandon's style. Sundar walked onto the stage, waving kindly, his calm aura immediately contrasting the fiery energy of the studio. "Welcome, Mr. Pichai," Brandon said with a wide grin. "Or should I say, the most mysterious man in tech." Sundar sat comfortably across from him. "Thank you for having me, Brandon." The interview started smoothly enough, with light questions about Google's innovations, AI advancements, and Sundar's early life. But then, Brandon shifted gears, as expected. Sundar, Brandon began with a smirk. Some people say you're just a figurehead, that you were simply lucky to be in the right place at the right time, that Google runs itself. You just sit there signing papers. The audience chuckled. Sundar remained composed. Leadership isn't about controlling every detail, Brandon. It's about creating an environment where talented people can do their best work. My role is to support and guide, not micromanage. Brandon narrowed his eyes. But you don't code anymore, do you? I mean, can you even write a full algorithm now, Mr. Pichai? Or have you outsourced all of that too? The laughter grew louder. For a brief second, Sundar noticed the camera zooming in for a close-up, waiting for a reaction. He gave none. I still understand technology deeply, Sundar said softly. Coding is one skill. Leading thousands of engineers requires a different set of skills, empathy, vision, and responsibility. The crowd quieted for a moment. Brandon, sensing the room wasn't fully on his side yet, pushed harder. A lot of people also say, you don't really belong here. An immigrant boy from India now sitting on top of Silicon Valley. Come on, do you really think you deserve it? A wave of awkward murmurs moved through the audience. The question was clearly intended to provoke. Sundar's face remained peaceful. I believe everyone deserves an opportunity, he replied. I was fortunate to have good teachers, supportive parents, and the chance to work hard. Where someone is born should not limit where they can go. Some members of the audience applauded gently. Brandon leaned back, smiling, but frustrated. Suddenly, from the corner of the stage, a commotion erupted. The backstage curtain swung open, and a familiar voice boomed across the room. Now hold on just a second. The audience gasped. It was Eddie Murphy, walking confidently onto the stage, wearing his trademark leather jacket and playful grin. The cameras whipped around. The audience burst into a mixture of shock, cheers, and excitement. Eddie Murphy on this show. This was completely unexpected. Brandon looked stunned. Eddie, what are you doing here? Eddie grabbed a spare microphone and pointed toward the crowd. Brandon, I was backstage listening to this whole thing, and I just couldn't sit back any longer. The audience roared. Eddie turned to Sundar and put a friendly hand on his shoulder. This man right here worked his way from a small apartment in India, walked thousands of miles metaphorically, and earned every single thing he's got. You want to mock him for being an immigrant? For leading one of the most complex companies in history? Let me tell you something. It's easy to talk from behind a desk, but try building something from scratch. The room went silent. Sundar smiled humbly, but Eddie wasn't done. You see, Brandon, we celebrate underdogs in this country, or at least we're supposed to. This man's story is the American dream, and if you can't respect that, maybe you're in the wrong chair. The audience exploded into applause, many even rising to their feet. Brandon tried to recover, but for once, he had nothing to say. Sundar gently spoke, his voice even calmer now. Thank you, Eddie. What matters most is not where we start, but what we get back as we rise. That is why I'm here. The moment was electric. What started as an attempted ambush had transformed into an unexpected celebration of resilience, dignity, and grace. The audience was moved. Even some crew members who had snickered earlier now looked down in shame. But this was only the beginning, because what Eddie Murphy did next would shake the studio even more. The conversation that changed everything. The studio remained electric. After Eddie Murphy's unexpected intervention, the audience buzzed with excitement, murmurs spreading like wildfire across the packed room as cameras captured every movement, every reaction. Brandon, the host, sat frozen for a moment, the confident smirk he wore throughout the interview slowly melting under the weight of the moment he had lost control of. Eddie's words had struck a nerve, not only with the audience, but even with some of Brandon's staff, who now looked toward the stage with a mixture of surprise and respect. Sundar sat gracefully, his expression unchanged, though there was a gentle light of gratitude in his eyes as he exchanged a brief glance with Eddie. The two men, from vastly different worlds, shared an unspoken bond, one forged through their respective battles against judgment, stereotypes, and adversity. Both had climbed steep mountains in their lives, though their peaks were of different nature. And now, in this unlikely setting, their paths intersected with powerful resonance. Brandon, still gripping the edge of his chair, attempted to reclaim his dominance. He cleared his throat, raised his eyebrows theatrically, and forced a smile. "Well, Eddie, since you've decided to make a guest appearance, why don't you tell us exactly what you find so inspiring about Sundar's little success story? Surely, in your world of comedy, you know how narratives can be embellished." His voice was laced with the same condescension that had previously infected his questions toward Sundar. But the audience wasn't buying it anymore. Eddie, unfazed, leaned forward, gripping the microphone casually as his voice carried strength, blended with emotion. "You know, Brandon, people like you always think success is just a lucky break. You think people just stumble into greatness like it's some sort of game show prize. But let me tell you something real." The room grew quiet again, the audience leaning in. Sensing the weight behind Eddie's words, Eddie continued, his voice smooth but powerful. "I met Sundar Pichai years ago at a charity gala. We had a conversation that stuck with me. He didn't talk about his wealth. He didn't brag about Google or fame or any of that. Instead, he talked about the days when he was growing up in Chennai, India. He told me about sharing a small apartment with his parents and brother, about studying by candlelight because of constant blackouts, about standing in long lines with his mother just to get a basic telephone for their home. You sit there on your shiny set, Brandon, and you think you're clever for questioning whether he deserves what he has today. But you weren't there when he was walking to school barefoot. Some days, carrying books he borrowed because his family couldn't afford to buy them. You weren't there when he dreamed not of billions, but of simply being able to make a difference. And now that he's made it, instead of lashing out at the world or lording his success over others, he uses his platform to uplift people, to fund education programs, to support young inventors, and to build opportunities for others who came from where he once stood. The studio was silent now, except for the occasional sniffles from members of the audience, who found themselves unexpectedly emotional. Even the cameramen, trained professionals used to staying detached, struggled to hide their moist eyes behind the lenses. Brandon tried once again to steer the conversation toward controversy. "But Eddie, don't you think the tech industry today is full of problems? Privacy concerns, misinformation, automation replacing jobs. Surely Mr. Pichai should be held accountable for these failures under his leadership." His tone was sharp, but desperation crept in, a clear sign that the tides had shifted far beyond his control. Sundar gently raised his hand, signaling that he wished to respond. The audience watched closely. With a voice calm yet unwavering, Sundar addressed the question with grace. "Brandon, I agree entirely that technology today carries both great promise and great responsibility. I do not deny that challenges exist, some very serious ones. But leadership is not about pretending problems don't exist. It's about facing them with honesty and committing to solutions that serve people, not just profits. Every decision I make weighs heavily because I know it affects millions, sometimes billions, of lives. I lose sleep over these issues. But what drives me is not fear, it's purpose. I grew up knowing what it feels like to not have access. That's why I fight so hard to ensure that technology is not a privilege of the few, but a right for the many. And yes, we stumble, but each stumble teaches us how to do better." The raw sincerity in Sundar's words caused a profound stillness to blanket the room. No clever retort came from Brandon this time. The studio audience, many of whom had walked into the room expecting an ordinary talk show, now found themselves experiencing something far more human, far more honest than they had anticipated. Eddie, sensing that the room was shifting towards something even more important than just defending a friend, leaned in once more. "See, Brandon, that's what you don't get. It's easy to criticize from the sidelines. A real leadership is about carrying burdens nobody sees, making decisions that weigh on your heart every single day, and despite all that, Sundar remains one of the kindest, most humble men I've met. That's rare." The audience erupted into applause, no longer able to contain their respect. The clapping turned into a standing ovation, an overwhelming endorsement not only for Sundar's leadership, but for his humility and grace in the face of cheap attempts to discredit him. The camera zoomed in on audience members wiping tears from their eyes, others nodding emphatically, and some even clasping their hands in admiration. But as the crowd celebrated, something else was unfolding behind the scenes. A growing tension among certain studio executives. In the control room upstairs, the show's head director, Victoria Lambert, watched anxiously through the monitors. She had been promised high drama for tonight's episode of viral sensation that would boost ratings. But now, The narrative was spiraling into something entirely different, one of inspiration rather than controversy. She turned sharply toward one of her assistant producers. "This isn't the show we pitched. Where's the heat? Where's the edge? We're losing our viral moment," she hissed. The assistant producer, a young woman named Rachel, replied hesitantly, "But Victoria, the audience loves it. Look at them. This is real. This is better than fake drama." Victoria's eyes narrowed. "You don't understand the business. The sponsors expect drama, conflict, viral clips that explode online. They didn't sign up for a motivational seminar." Rachel bit her lip but said nothing more. Down on the stage, unaware of the brewing tension behind the cameras, Sundar took a deep breath. "Brandon, may I share something personal before we continue?" he asked softly. The host, cornered and visibly uncomfortable, nodded reluctantly. "Of course," Sundar continued, his voice steady yet filled with emotion. "When I was a young boy, my father used to sit me down at night and talk about the world beyond our small city. He couldn't afford many luxuries, but he had a vision that education was the great equalizer. He would save his modest salary as an electrical engineer to buy me second-hand books. He believed that knowledge could break any barrier, and every night, before I fell asleep, he would whisper, 'One day, you'll build something that matters.' Those words became my guiding star. Not fame, not fortune, purpose." The entire audience stood again. Some clapped. Others simply stood in silent admiration, tears glistening in their eyes. Sundar's voice cracked slightly, but remained strong as he added, "And today, I still hear my father's voice in my head when I make every decision. I know he is watching, and I hope I make him proud." The emotional weight of the moment was immense. For a full minute, the studio was enveloped in silence except for the sound of applause. Even Brandon lowered his eyes, momentarily silenced. By a depth of humanity he hadn't expected or prepared for, Eddie reached over, patted Sundar's shoulder again, and said with a chuckle, "Now you see why I couldn't sit back there quietly, Brandon. Some stories are too powerful to let anyone diminish them." The cameras kept rolling, capturing one of the most unexpectedly moving moments the show had ever broadcasted. Social media was already ablaze as viewers at home flooded platforms with hashtags praising Sundar and Eddie for turning what was meant to be an ambush into a masterclass in humility and grace. And yet, in the shadows of the control room, Victoria Lambert's frustration boiled. But none of them knew that what was about to happen next would shake the entire studio, even more deeply than anyone expected, for someone else had been watching this broadcast from afar. Someone whose sudden entrance would not only shock the studio, but completely transform the story in a way nobody could have predicted. The billionaire's entrance, the atmosphere inside the studio, was unlike anything anyone had ever expected. The production team had long abandoned their original segment plans. The teleprompter sat untouched, as its pre-written provocations no longer had any place in the unfolding narrative. Instead, what began as a calculated attempt at controversy had blossomed into one of the most profoundly human conversations ever televised, all centered around the quiet resilience and grace of Sundar Pichai, Brandon Clark, whose entire brand was built on pushing his guests into discomfort, sat like a fading shadow beneath the bright light of genuine leadership, his carefully curated show slipping from his grasp. And yet, unbeknownst to him and the others on stage, a new energy was now approaching from outside the studio, one that would soon take the evening to an entirely new dimension. As the commercial break continued, viewers across the world remained glued to their screens, unwilling to look away even for a second. Social media was now in a frenzy, with celebrities, business leaders, educators, and ordinary people all chiming in to praise the inspiring discussion. Inside the control room, Victoria Lambert continued pacing angrily, her frustration growing with every passing moment. Yet down on the studio floor, neither Sundar nor Eddie nor Oprah allowed themselves to be distracted by the politics behind the cameras. They were fully present, speaking quietly among themselves, appreciating the rare purity of the moment. It was then that the heavy double doors at the back of the studio opened once more, and in walked a figure who commanded immediate attention not through spectacle, but by the sheer force of his global presence. Tall, composed, and dressed in his signature black turtleneck, jeans, and simple sneakers, stood none other than Elon Musk. The collective gasp that rippled across the audience was instinctive. Whispers erupted like wildfire as heads turned, necks craned, and phones were hastily raised to capture this new development. Even the most seasoned members of the crew exchanged stunned glances. What was Musk doing here? Brandon's eyes widened with a mixture of relief and fear. Relief, perhaps, that a new unpredictable force had arrived to possibly rescue his crumbling show. Fear, because Ellen's presence could steer the entire night in an even more uncontrollable direction. Sundar, on the other hand, calmly turned. In his seat, his face as composed as ever, his humility untouched by the celebrity now joining them. Eddie raised his eyebrows and chuckled softly under his breath, recognizing the weight of what was about to unfold. Oprah, standing with poise, observed Musk's approach with her ever-curious gaze, knowing full well that his arrival meant the evening was far from reaching its peak. Without waiting for an invitation, Elon walked directly toward the stage, his steps deliberate and confident. The crew scrambled to hand him a microphone as the camera shifted swiftly to capture every detail. Standing now just feet from Sundar, Eddie, and Oprah, Ellen's piercing gaze swept across the stage and audience, before finally breaking into a sly smile. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said, his voice carrying easily through the room, half teasing, half serious. Oprah smiled graciously. "Elon, you're always welcome to any conversation. But I must admit, this is quite an unexpected surprise." Elon nodded, his eyes settling on Sundar. "I was watching the broadcast. Couldn't resist coming down in person. After all, it's not every day you see the internet light up for something other than outrage or scandal. Tonight, we're seeing something rare, a public celebration of humility." He paused, his tone shifting from light to serious. "And that deserves to be witnessed." The audience applauded instinctively, sensing yet another powerful shift in the energy. Brandon, desperate to salvage some control, leaned forward and seized the opportunity to inject tension. "Well, since you're here, Elon, maybe you can offer a different perspective. You're known for taking bold risks, for shaking up industries. Do you think Sundar here plays to safe? That he avoids controversy by playing the nice guy card?" The question hung in the air for a brief moment. The audience tensed, fully aware that this could reignite the fiery spectacle that Brandon had originally hoped for. Elon, however, did not take the bait. Instead, he inhaled deeply, his expression thoughtful. "That's a lazy question, Brandon," he said calmly, causing a ripple of laughter from the audience. "Leadership isn't a personality contest. It's not about who's louder or who takes the biggest headlines. What Sundar does, and does exceptionally well, is balance massive complexity with stability. You have no idea how difficult it is to manage a global platform that touches billions of lives daily, all while navigating regulation, cultural sensitivity, data privacy, innovation, and ethics simultaneously. Being nice doesn't mean weak. Sometimes it takes far more strength to remain kind under pressure than to lash out." Sundar nodded appreciatively, but remained silent, allowing Ellen's words to stand on their own. Oprah, watching Elon with respect, added softly, "Grace, under pressure is a form of mastery, isn't it?" Elon smiled slightly. "Exactly." The studio audience clapped yet again, fully engrossed in the unscripted wisdom being shared on stage. Brandon, growing increasingly cornered, desperately grasped for one last shot at stirring the pot. "But, Elon, you yourself have been criticized for being confrontational, for challenging norms. Are you saying Sundar's approach is better than yours?" For a moment, even the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. But Elon, to his credit, answered with unexpected humility. "Different leaders serve different purposes at different times. Sometimes disruption is necessary to break outdated models. Other times, stewardship is needed to carefully guide something precious without breaking it." Sundar has been entrusted with one of the most powerful engines of information humanity has ever created. His job requires patience, wisdom, and yes, immense restraint. My style wouldn't work there. His does. That's what makes him the right man for that seat. The audience erupted once more, standing in ovation for the fourth time that evening. This time not out of spectacle, but profound respect for the rare display of mutual admiration and nuanced understanding between two of the most influential minds of their generation. The narrative that had begun with an attempt to undermine Sundar had now completely inverted itself into a historic moment of collective appreciation, and not a single soul in the room could deny the electricity pulsing through the air. Up in the control room, Victoria Lambert's rage reached a boiling point. She slammed her headset onto the table, shouting at her bewildered team, "We've lost everything." This was supposed to be provocative. It was supposed to spark outrage. Instead, They've turned it into some kind of leadership summit. Rachel, now emboldened by the undeniable power of what was happening below, finally stood her ground. Victoria, she said firmly, for once, we're giving the world something it desperately needs, hope. Maybe that's what will make this episode truly viral. As the applause in the studio faded into a heavy, emotional silence, Oprah stepped forward one final time, her voice firm yet gentle. This, she said, gesturing toward Sundar, Eddie, and Elon, is the conversation our world needs right now. Different backgrounds, different industries, different approaches, but united by integrity, courage, and responsibility, we often celebrate those who are loudest. Tonight, let us celebrate those who are kindest. Sundar, feeling the enormity of the moment, finally spoke again, his words quiet but deliberate. Leadership is not about dominance, it's about service, and service begins with listening, with compassion, and with a sense of duty that extends beyond yourself. If my story tonight has reminded even one young person that their dreams are valid, then it was worth every difficult question. The studio once again erupted into applause, and this time, as the cameras captured sweeping panoramic shots of the audience, the standing ovation was nearly unanimous, with faces across all ages and backgrounds visibly moved by what had unfolded. The show that had begun as a trap had transformed into one of the most powerful public displays of grace, resilience, and humanity that television had ever broadcasted. But as the lights dimmed slightly to mark the approaching conclusion of this extraordinary evening, little did anyone realize that one final, deeply personal twist was still yet to come, one that would connect Sundar's journey to something far more intimate and emotional than even he could have anticipated. The hidden guest, the studio, had been transformed into something sacred, no longer merely a stage of entertainment, but a temple of wisdom, humility, and shared humanity. The audience stood breathless, as if afraid that even the slightest sound might disrupt the purity of what they had witnessed. What had begun as a planned ambush had instead become a globally broadcast masterclass on leadership, grace, and character, with Sundar Pichai sitting at its core, surrounded by voices that amplified his silent strength rather than diminish it. Eddie Murphy had defended his friend with sincerity that moved millions. Oprah had elevated the conversation to a spiritual height. Elon Musk had added layers of unexpected respect and humility that deepened the weight of the moment. And yet, as the cameras panned across the audience and producers scrambled behind the scenes, there was still a quiet rumble building. Beneath the surface, something none of them had yet seen coming, while the crew frantically prepared for what was to be the final segment of this already historic broadcast. A soft knock sounded at the private security entrance at the back of the building. One of the guards, initially confused, checked his tablet for any scheduled arrivals. There was no mention of additional guests, but standing on the other side of the entrance was an elderly Indian woman dressed in a simple yet elegant traditional sari, her eyes filled with a mixture of nervousness and quiet determination. In her hand, she clutched a small woven handbag and an old photograph. Her voice was gentle, but firm as she spoke to the guard. "Please, my name is Lakshmi Pichai. I am Sundar's mother. I've come a long way to be here tonight." The guard froze for a moment, though her name wasn't on the guest list. There was no mistaking the resemblance, the same gentle eyes, the same poise that Sundar himself carried so naturally. After a brief moment of hesitation, the guard made a quick call to the control room, his voice urgent. Within seconds, Rachel, the young assistant producer who had quietly rooted for the evening's unexpected transformation, raced to the door, her heart pounding. When she saw the elderly woman standing there with humble dignity, her breath caught. "Mrs. Pichai, my God, we weren't expecting you." Lakshmi offered a small smile. "I wasn't expecting to come either, but I've watched every word of this interview from my home, and my heart told me I needed to be here. May I?" Rachel, already fighting back tears, nodded. "Please, come with me." As Lakshmi was quietly escorted backstage, Rachel made a quick but daring decision. She tapped directly into Brandon's earpiece and spoke calmly. "Brandon, we have an unexpected final guest. Trust me, let her come." Brandon, now fully aware that he had lost any control over the evening, merely sighed. At this point, does it even matter? And with that, Rachel gave the silent signal. Back on stage, as the audience finally began settling down from yet another standing ovation, Oprah sensed a new energy emerging behind the curtain. She glanced subtly toward the producer booth where Rachel stood, Receiving the quiet confirmation, Oprah turned back toward Sundar, whose serene expression remained unchanged, though a faint flicker of curiosity crossed his eyes. "Sundar," Oprah said softly, addressing him directly once more, "I believe we have one final surprise for you tonight." At that moment, the heady curtains parted once more, and from the shadows emerged Lakshmi Pichai. The entire audience gasped audibly. Sundar's eyes widened instantly, a soft breath escaping him as he rose instinctively to his feet, his composure for the first time tonight breaking into raw, visible emotion. Eddie stood as well, his mouth softly whispering, "Oh man," while Elon smiled warmly and clapped his hands gently. Oprah, always the master conductor of emotion, stepped aside and allowed the mother to walk gracefully toward her son. The audience, witnessing this deeply intimate reunion unfold live before them, was struck silent once again. No music, no narration, just the sound of an elderly mother's sandals gently tapping against the studio floor. As she crossed the stage toward the man who had always been her little boy, Sundar stepped forward, his arms open, and embraced his mother tightly as tears finally streamed freely from his eyes. Lakshmi whispered softly in his ear, words that were not meant for microphones or cameras, only for her son's heart. When they finally broke their embrace, Oprah delicately handed Lakshmi a microphone, though it was clear she did not need. Prompting, standing beside her son, she addressed the audience directly. "When my son was a little boy," she began, her voice trembling slightly but filled with pride, "our home was small, very small. We did not have much money, but we had love. We had dreams. His father and I believed, even when times were difficult, that if we planted seeds of education, those seeds would one day grow into something beautiful." The audience remained silent, captivated by the purity of her words. "I remember," she continued, "there were days when we could not afford new textbooks. Sundar would borrow them from his classmates, or sit under the street lamps at night to study because of frequent blackouts. But no matter how difficult things were, my son never complained. He always believed that knowledge could change his world." Lakshmi paused, glancing tenderly toward Sundar, her eyes now glistening. "And now, I sit here before all of you, seeing my son not just as a successful man, but as a kind man, a man who did not let the world harden him, who still remembers where he came from. I am proud not only because of what he has achieved, but because of who he remains." At that moment, the dam broke entirely. The audience stood again, many openly sobbing, their hearts overwhelmed by the raw humanity playing out in front of them. Social media exploded even more intensely than before, with millions around the world posting emotional messages about the purity of a mother's pride. The hashtags #SundarandHismer and #TrueLeadership now were trending globally within minutes, breaking records for engagement. Eddie Murphy wiped his own eyes, laughing through his tears. "Man, y'all got me crying on live TV. I didn't sign up for this much beauty tonight." Elon Musk nodded in respect, his voice warm. "This, right here, is the most powerful thing I've seen on television in years." Brandon, now completely irrelevant to the conversation and painfully aware of it, sat in humbled silence as the cameras had long abandoned him, focusing entirely on the profound scene unfolding between Sundar and his mother. Lakshmi, gathering herself once more, turned back to Oprah and the audience. "To all the young people watching tonight," she said gently, "never forget where you come from. Be kind, work hard, and believe that even the smallest seed can one day grow into something magnificent. My son is proof of that." The applause was no longer applause. It was an eruption of universal catharsis, an audience releasing all their emotions in one collective outpouring of joy, empathy, and inspiration. This was no longer a television show. It was no longer a celebrity panel. It was a spiritual awakening delivered through the unexpected lens of a tech CEO's quiet journey. And as the cameras captured every tear-stained face, every standing spectator, and every breathless sob, one universal truth became impossible to deny: this night would be remembered forever. But even as the studio drowned in applause, as Sundar stood holding his mother's hand, as Eddie, Oprah, and Elon exchanged tearful glances of solidarity, one final surprise was already being orchestrated quietly in the background. Something deeply personal, far from cameras, that would soon bring this extraordinary evening to an even more unforgettable climax. The legacy moment. The audience stood frozen in a collective embrace of humanity. their souls deeply moved by the powerful reunion between Sundar and his mother. The air inside the studio felt heavy, yet sacred, as if time itself had slowed, to allow everyone present to absorb the pure weight of the moment. Cameras, lights, and microphones were mere witnesses now. No production design or artificial script could have created what was unfolding organically on that stage. Eddie Murphy stood with arms crossed, his eyes moist with unrestrained emotion. Oprah, still poised as ever, gently held Lakshmi Pichai's other hand in solidarity, while Elon Musk nodded silently, his usual defiant confidence now replaced with profound respect. And in the center of it all stood Sundar, no longer simply the CEO of one of the world's most powerful companies, but once again a son, a student of life, and a humble servant to the values that had carried him so far. And yet, as the applause continued, a quiet movement was happening backstage. Rachel, the assistant producer, who had been the moral compass of the night, moved quickly toward a small group of staff who were setting up a large monitor on wheels. She glanced nervously toward Victoria Lambert, the executive producer who had long surrendered to the power of the night's unforeseen direction. Surprisingly, for the first time, Victoria did not resist. She simply nodded in silence, as if finally accepting that no manufactured conflict could ever compete with what had naturally blossomed tonight. Rachel whispered into her headset, "We're ready." A quiet cue was given, and the monitor was carefully rolled onto the stage. Positioned directly behind Sundar and his mother, Sundar glanced at the screen curiously, as did the audience, unaware of what was about to unfold. The screen flickered to life, revealing a live video feed, not from inside the studio, but from a modest, well-lit schoolroom thousands of miles away, back in his hometown of Chennai, India. The room was filled with dozens of young children, their faces bright with excitement, gathered around their teacher, who was barely able to contain her own emotions. The camera zoomed in slightly, and Sundar immediately recognized the old blackboard on the wall, the simple wooden desks, the peeling paint on the faded green walls. It was the very same school where his own journey had begun decades ago. For a moment, Sundar's breath caught in his throat. His lips quivered ever so slightly, his eyes fixed on the children. The teacher, her voice shaking with joy, addressed the broadcast. "Namaste, Sundar sir," she began softly, "we are watching. You live from your old school. All of these children sitting here tonight are dreaming big because of your story. Your journey gives them hope that they, too, can rise above any circumstance." The camera panned gently across the room as the children waved excitedly, some holding handmade signs with messages scribbled in colorful crayon. "Thank you, Sundar sir. We will study hard, and one day we will build like you." The innocence and sincerity on their faces pierced through every hardened heart watching worldwide. The studio audience gasped softly, many unable to stop their tears, overwhelmed by the full circle now closing before their eyes. Lakshmi, standing beside her son, gripped his arm lovingly, whispering words only a mother could offer. "See, my child, your father's dream lives in all of them now." The teacher continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Sundar sir, we want you to know that we have renamed our computer science classroom after you. From today forward, it will be called the Sundar Pichai Knowledge Room, where future students will learn, dream, and build toward a better future because of your example." Behind her, a new plaque was unveiled, its simple gold lettering gleaming under the humble fluorescent lights, displaying Sundar's name in both Tamil and English. The studio was drowning in a flood of emotion. Oprah gently covered her mouth. Unable to contain her tears, Eddie exhaled deeply, shaking his head with a proud smile, while Elon, often known for his detached brilliance, softly clapped his hands in genuine admiration. His voice barely a whisper. "This is legacy." Sundar finally found his voice, though it trembled with overwhelming gratitude. Thank you so much," he managed to say into the microphone. "I am beyond honored. But this," he paused, gesturing toward the screen, the audience, his mother, and his companions on stage. "This is not my story alone. This is my father's story, my mother's story, my teacher's story, my entire community's story. And now, it belongs to all of you. If my journey can light even one small candle in someone else's darkness, then every challenge along the way was worth it." The teacher responded from the screen, her own tears shining brightly. "You have already lit many candles, Sundar sir, and the light continues to spread." The audience, unable to contain themselves any longer, erupted into A fifth standing ovation. This one the loudest and most prolonged yet. It was not simply applause for a successful man, but a universal salute to resilience, compassion, humility, and the invisible power of a dream nurtured quietly by love, hardship, and relentless hope. Social media numbers soared to record-breaking heights. News outlets began cutting into live coverage to broadcast the scene. Hashtags flooded every platform. Hashtag Sundar Legacy. Hashtag Mother and Son. Hashtag The Real Dream. Hashtag True Inspiration. And hashtag Leadership with heart. It was no longer a viral moment. It had become a global movement. In the control room, even Victoria Lambert, who had entered the evening determined to manufacture scandal, now found herself sobbing quietly into a tissue. Rachel gently placed a hand on her shoulder. For the first time in her long career chasing controversy, Victoria whispered the words she never imagined she would say, "This is beautiful." Back on stage, as the emotional storm gently settled into a shared stillness, Oprah finally spoke once more, her voice barely holding together. "Sundar, tonight was supposed to be another empty episode of confrontation and spectacle, but you turned it into a lesson for the world, a reminder that dignity, humility, and compassion are not weaknesses, they are the purest strengths. You have given us all a gift tonight." Eddie, always the emotional anchor amid his humor, placed a hand over his heart. "Man, you just made the world better tonight." Elon Musk, rarely one for flowery sentiment, nodded thoughtfully. "In a world filled with noise, you've shown us the power of quiet leadership." Sundar looked out into the audience, his voice steady now, filled with peace. "I am grateful beyond words. But tonight, let this not be about me. Let it be a call for all of us to invest in the next generation, to support education, to uplift every child whose dreams flicker faintly in the night. Because inside every one of them lives a spark that can light up the world." And with that, the studio lights slowly dimmed as the live broadcast came to its final close. But the story was only just beginning for millions watching around the globe. In homes, schools, offices, and hearts everywhere, a new narrative was being written. One not of fame or scandal, but of quiet strength, unwavering grace, and the extraordinary power of kindness. What was intended as a staged attack had instead become one of the most moving, timeless celebrations of human dignity that the world would never forget. The aftermath, a global awakening as the final credits rolled and the broadcast faded into darkness. The audience remained standing in stunned reverence long after the cameras stopped filming. In that studio, history had been made not by explosive controversy or sensational scandal, but by the quiet, steady heartbeat of dignity. The energy in the room was electric and yet deeply peaceful, as if every person present had collectively witnessed something far greater than a simple interview or talk show segment. It was something transformative, and even after the official broadcast had ended, the ripples of what occurred inside that studio spread across the world, like an unstoppable wave of light cutting through endless noise. Outside the studio, as the audience slowly began filing out, people clutched tissues and wiped their eyes, hugging strangers exchanging words of gratitude as though they had all lived a shared experience, far more intimate than they could have ever imagined when they first took their seats earlier that evening. Meanwhile, inside, Sundar remained standing on stage, his mother's hand still firmly held in his, Eddie by his side, Oprah offering her quiet strength, and Elon observing with thoughtful contemplation. The world's most powerful media networks had shifted their headlines within minutes. Every major outlet began broadcasting urgent special coverage. Sundar Pichai turns confrontation into global inspiration, unexpected TV moments sparks, leadership revolution, and an interview that touched the soul of the world. In India, the images of Sundar and his mother were displayed on enormous screens across city squares, celebrated as a living embodiment of the nation's potential. In classrooms across impoverished villages, children watched wide-eyed, seeing, for the first time, someone who had once sat exactly where they sat, walk across a world stage without arrogance, but with humility, empathy, and grace. Even hardened political figures paused their usual rhetoric to praise what had unfolded. News anchors struggled to maintain composure as they narrated the images of Sundar's old school, the children holding handmade signs, and the delicate embrace between mother and son that had captured the hearts of millions. And yet, while the world was reacting, inside that quiet studio, something even deeper was taking place. For after the audience left, after the last crew member powered down the last camera, Sundar and his closest companions remained together, processing what had happened. Now beyond the glare of public lights, there was no need for applause anymore. No microphones or cameras were recording this final conversation. This was simply human souls sharing space after something sacred had occurred. Eddie finally broke the silence, his voice warm but thoughtful. You know, Sundar, tonight, you taught all of us something, not by preaching, not by fighting, but just by being who you are. I've seen a lot of crazy stuff in my life, more than I ever cared to admit, but I've rarely seen something so pure as what you and your mom shared up here tonight. His voice cracked slightly as he chuckled, wiping away lingering tears. Man, I could still hear your mother's voice when she said, "See, my child." That hit me like a ton of bricks. Sundar smiled softly, still holding his mother's hand as she gently rested her head against his shoulder. Eddie, Sundar said, everything I built, it all comes from these hands that held me when I was nothing. My parents were my first teachers, my first leaders. All I've done is carry their love forward. Oprah, ever the wise observer of human souls, nodded. And you've carried it farther than most could even dream. But perhaps the most beautiful thing is that you never let the weight of your success crush your humility. Elon Musk, still standing thoughtfully nearby, added something rare for him, a quiet confession. I've been called many things, he began. Innovator, disruptor, genius. But tonight, I realized something. Disruption is powerful, but so is protection, protecting the dignity of others, protecting one's values, protecting hope. You have protected those things, Sundar, and the world will remember you for it. For a man often accused of speaking with little filter, Ellen's words carried surprising weight. It was not the voice of a billionaire entrepreneur, but of a man recognizing a rare purity that even his disruptive genius could not manufacture. As the room settled into a peaceful quiet again, Lakshmi Pichai spoke softly, her words filled with gentle authority. We must never forget that even the most beautiful trees grow from the smallest seeds, and those seeds only grow if watered with patience and love. My husband believed that, and now I see the forest growing before my very eyes. Sundar nodded, slowly, his voice catching as he spoke. I only wish Appa could have seen this moment. His voice trembled, but carried no bitterness, only longing. He believed so deeply that education could change everything. Lakshmi placed her hand over his. He is here, Sundar, in every word you spoke tonight, in every young child watching you now, in every candle that was lit because of your journey. He lives. The weight of her words sat heavy in the air, not as a sadness, but as a completion, a full circle drawn perfectly by life itself. Outside the studio, an unexpected spontaneous gathering had begun. Hundreds, then thousands of people had gathered, holding candles, singing softly, creating a makeshift vigil. They weren't there for celebrity sightings or sensational headlines. They were there because they felt part of something greater, a reawakening of values that felt lost for so long. Humility, kindness, gratitude, and the power of education. Inside, Rachel approached quietly. Sundar, there's a large crowd outside. They're not leaving. They've started lighting candles. Sundar looked at his mother, then to Oprah, Eddie, and Elon. Then let's go greet them. And so, quietly, with no cameras, no press conferences, no orchestrated spectacle, the five of them walked out together into the cool night air, where thousands stood under the stars. As the people saw Sundar and his mother emerge hand in hand, the crowd grew quiet, allowing the moment to breathe. Sundar stood humbly before them, raising his hands gently. Thank you, he whispered, his voice amplified softly by the natural acoustics of the night. This is not about me. This is about all of us. This is about what we can build together, starting from wherever we are, no matter how small. Tonight, we showed that kindness is not weakness, humility is not failure, and dreams are not reserved for the privileged. They belong to anyone who dares to believe. And as the crowd softly began to chant his name, not with fanaticism, but with profound gratitude, Lakshmi gently whispered once more into his ear, the same words she had whispered when he was just a little boy sitting under dim lights back in Chennai. One day, you will build something that matters. And tonight, standing under the starlit sky surrounded by thousands of hearts touched by his grace, Sundar finally realized that day had come. It was no longer just a story of success. It had become a movement, a new language of leadership written not in power or money, but in humility, resilience, and love.